Streaming at the confluence of two great rivers. This is WHEI, St. Paul.
And now, a program that digs deep into the subterranean world that lives and breathes beneath the streets of St. Paul. This is Under the Brick, with host, tour operator Cynthia Schreiner Smith, and geologist and author Dr. Greg Brick.
Welcome to another episode of Under the Brick, where we talk about everything subterranean in the Twin Cities. I'm your host, Cynthia Smith. I own and operate Sin City Tours in St. Paul. And speaking of subterranean Twin Cities, we know somebody who wrote a book by that very title, Dr. Greg Brick, who we interview about all those wonderful things hiding underneath our dear cities. Welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me.
When did you write your first book? I just sort of forgot to ask that.
Yeah, my first book was Iowa Underground, and I wrote that when it came out in 2004, so It was long before Subterranean Twin Cities. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's just I know you have many books. That's just my favorite one. But let's get into this week's subject. This is something I think a lot of people have never heard this term before, and that is the urban Nile. Can you tell us what the urban Nile is? You have a whole chapter on that in your book.
Yeah, this is an expression that I got from the travel literature. I didn't invent it, but it's just the idea of being in an urban area, so, very built up, but then throw in the concept of the Nile River. So it's very incongruous imagery. It's like this primeval, this primeval imagery, alligators and so on. And, well, Egypt has alligator and crocodiles. So it all kind of, came together in this one, almost like an oxymoron.
But the urban Nile is a network mostly of streams that run underground, correct?
Yes. In my book, I only use it for the streams that are under the city of St. Paul, but it'd be applied to any city, anywhere in the world. But I use it in particular for Trout Brook and Phelan Creek in Lower Town.
Okay, so let's talk about those two. I think that's where we need to focus today. Trout Brook and Phelan Creek, wasn't Phelan Creek was the main one, and Trout Brook was like a tributary of it, I think. But they came down, draining towards the Mississippi River, went through this really boggy area kind of between Dayton's Bluff and Union Depot. That was all like swamp, kind of.
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah. And those creeks were sunk below ground in giant culverts by the railroads to lay down railroad tracks. So they're still there, but now they're underground and we can't see them.
That's correct. Yes, these streams were above ground back in the day, and were highly annoying to St. Paul Public Works, and because they had to build bridges to get over them, and that was their preferred solution. And when the railroads came along, they found these streams actually very useful in one sense because they provided a minimum gradient for trains to get from river level, where of course Union Depot and there's a lot of railroad tracks down there in the floodplain, and with the various steamboat landings where you'd want to load and offload goods. They need to get out of the top of the bluffs, and you can't just haul a train straight up with a crane up the cliff. Well, you could, but that's doing it the hard way. So they found these streams have a very, very, very nice, easy gradient for a train, minimum gradient for the train to just go and get up onto the top of the cliff. But downside of that is you got this stream running right past alongside the tracks. That's annoying. That part is annoying. stream's not going to go away no matter what you do. You can't dam it and dry out the ground. Doesn't work that way. And so they build these huge underground tunnels. In fact, these are the largest storm drains under the city of St. Paul, and just call it good.
So, yeah, what I understand is they submerged the streams in these giant culverts and then filled in the swampy area with fill, like from Baptist Hill, which was downtown, and they chopped it all down and threw it in there. And the Union Depot burnt down a couple times. They threw in bricks from the original Union Depots to fill it all up, and now there's railroad tracks on top of it. But those giant culverts are still there. I'd love to talk about them. There's photos of them in your book, running Trout Brook and Phelan Creek side by side and then merging together and emptying into the Mississippi River below, of course, the water level. But they're huge. Like, they have giant steel beams, and they sound beautiful to me, actually.
Yeah, that was some of the earliest use of steel beams in the tunnels around here. And George Wilson is the name that comes to mind with regard to this, because he was the St. Paul city engineer in the 1890s. And when he worked in concert with the railroads to get these tunnels built and properly draining out to the Mississippi River. And so I got the images in my book that you reference of these tunnels appear in the annual reports of the St. Paul Public Works. And he was so proud of what he had done. You know, it's not nowadays. It's like, I guess the brag is how many potholes you've filled or something. Forgive me, anyone at City Hall. But then it was something, it was these magnificent works like the pyramids, again, hitting that reference and draining all the water out that way.
You described them in your book, not only the steel beam ceilings, but beautiful Platteville limestone walls, granite floors. I wish I could have granite floors in my house. Now we have granite floors for Trout Brook and Phelan Creek underneath Lower Town. And then you describe in there gargoyles, not gargoyles the way we think of it, or are there actually gargoyles down there?
No, they didn't mean it to be. All this is like, it's pattern recognition. If you're in the dark with a flashlight and you're kind of scared to begin with, you think you see a gargoyle spitting water at you. What it really is, that's my impression the first time I saw it. What it is, it's just an ordinary flap valve on the wall of the sewer, and they didn't mean, they had no intention of that. But it is kind of, and since the flap moves, it's almost like the tongue of the gargoyle kind of. It's not like those gargoyles on building cornices that are just stationary. It has a tongue and actively spits at you. Okay,
so let's maybe paint a little picture of the urban Nile for folks. We know that they come together under Lower Town there and empty in the Mississippi River, but how far does it stretch? These underground streams, mainly Trout Brook and Phelan Creek. And they also have many tributaries too, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So the longest single stretch underground in St. Paul is 5 miles of the Trout Brook Tunnel that run from the waterfront, the Mississippi River, up to Lake Como. And this is, to my delight, back in the days when I was sewering, which is what it was called, wasn't even dignified by the term caving. And you could start, which I did many times, start at Lake Como in your gear with flashlights and crawl in a small inlet at the south end of the lake and then follow it for 5 full miles till you get to downtown St. Paul. And it was all completely underground. So that gives you an idea of the size of that. Now, on the other hand, if you want to go to, if you want to go up the other branch, because that's kind of like where the road, they come together in Lower Town immediately before hitting the river. If you want to go the other way on this kind of wishbone-shaped tunnel plan, go up Phelan Creek. That goes nearly an equal distance up to Phelan, Lake Phelan. And years ago, there's a funny story of a dog swimming in Lake Phelan, somebody's dog, and it got sucked into the inlet, and they eventually rescued it miles away at the Mississippi River, but it was barking all the way through the tunnel, apparently just, a terrifying thing. But so I've been up that branch also.
I'm glad to hear the dog was okay.
Yes.
Is that the branch that runs under Sweet Hollow, under the old Ham's Brewery, vaguely in that area, Phelan Creek?
Yes, it is. But historically, it did. So historically, it did exactly that. It ran from the Mississippi River up to Lake Phelan. But then in the 1920s, they got into some engineering works where they had to sever the creek and divert it to some other place.
Okay. I know there's many other tributaries, and we don't have time to get into all of them, but it's not just those two. There's the Kitsendale, but the one I just have to mention is the Beltline Tunnel, which
yes.
people think of these tunnels being close to downtown St. Paul. This one goes to the east side of St. Paul and ends by the lake I grew up on, Beaver Lake, right on the eastern border of St. Paul. That's a pretty long tunnel, too.
Yeah, so the thing about the Beltline Tunnel, and it runs right under Johnson Parkway for miles, and it's enormous. This is just as ginormous as the other ones I've just described. And yes, it takes water from Beaver Lake, and then runs down under Warner Road, finally ending up at the Mississippi River down by what had been the old Willowbrook fish hatchery, which is now just salt yards and barge yards, and so on. And so that's where all the water in Phelan Creek is going today, and since the 1920s. And so recently, very recently, there's been that big project to, as they call it, daylight Phelan Creek, to bring it back up to the surface, get it out of its murky tunnel so that it can be, a resource rather than, this horrible, sewer alligator infested waterway. When again, the sewer alligators are imaginary. And I kept saying I don't know how many times I said it over the years to the planners here. It doesn't work that way. I've seen it with my own eyes. What happened was when Lake Como was hooked into Trout Brook, there was so much water coming into this combined system that they had to cut something else out. And so with Lake Phelan, they routed it into this. They built the Beltline Tunnel and routed it there. And it still flows. Phelan Creek still flows, but through the Beltline Tunnel. So when you go down to Sweet Hollow nowadays, you still see water there. They call it Phelan Creek, but it really isn't. If you follow the tunnels out under St. Paul, that water is actually just ordinary street drainage coming from the very immediate vicinity of Sweet Hollow. It is not Phelan Creek water.
Okay. That is a clarification that I think I didn't know until very recently when you told me that. I want to bring up a guy named George Shepard, who was the city engineer, and Shepard Road is named after him. And he had a lot to do with building these culverts, didn't he?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time at St. Paul Public Works in the archives there in the 90s when I was an intern there. And George Shepard, and the name came up so many times. He was, if you can identify like the architect of underground St. Paul, that was it. And of course, it's the same namesake as Shepard Road. And he built Kitsendale, which we'll talk about another time. And then he built out the Trout Brook and Phelan Creek system after George Wilson, who I already described. He just left it like a short stub in the 1890s. And then George Shepard went wild and really added miles and miles onto the system.
Okay. So again, my usual question is we want to get to when you explored those tunnels. And I know you did. This time I know. One of my favorite descriptions in your book when you're talking about going into the Trout Brook culvert, one of the first times you said you were wearing your poor man's wetsuit, parentheses, street clothes.
Yeah, because I come from a caving background. I was a member of a caving club before I began the urban caving. And so those guys, they like to have the latest Petzl helmet and high-end gear, like from the Sierra store and REI and everything. And initially I tried wearing waders. The sort of work I do in the urban environment, those things just rip apart. The waders do. They rip at the crotch immediately. You get in a tunnel and rip them up. So after about half a dozen times, I'm not kidding, as I thought, I'm done with this idea of wearing waders. So I just went in, just wearing ordinary street clothes. And then it helps cut down on the awkward questions you get when you're walking on the surface. Like, ooh, well, you going trout fishing or something like that. And, you just say, oh, I just fell in the river or something. It's a lot easier.
Okay, I love that. Can you describe what you saw when you were down there? You talk about things like whalebacks and petrified sandbars and other things that have formed over the years. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, down at the outfall end of this giant system where all the water collects together and comes out. I mean, even during a dry spell, there's still a lot of water coming out of it. And it is scary. It's a lot of exploration I did probably unadvisedly alone in the early days because the cavers would have nothing to do with me. And it's spooktacular. They're the very large tunnel size, a lot of strange noises, not only the roar of the tunnel itself, but then little bits of water starting and stopping, like what was that? And then when you, in the initial part down by the river, it's kind of deep. And so if you go in just, when your waders, so-called imaginary waders, the water's about waist deep or up to your chest, and you have carp swimming around you. So, even though it's called Trout Brook, don't expect, a delicious, a speckled trout or a brook trout, or anticipate that wonderful meal when you come home. These are nasty, streetwise urban fish, and they're swimming around you, all between your legs and around your chest. And eventually, the water shallows out as you go upstream and you get to where it's just ankle deep. But you still have these intense pea soup fogs in the tunnels, because what happens is the air in the Trout Brook tunnel is of a slightly different temperature and humidity from that in the Phelan Creek tunnel. And where two air masses of different temperature and humidity come together, they form a fog, just like they do in weather patterns on the surface. And so there's no fog in the upper tunnels. It's all clear. But when those two come together, is a very dense fog. And so the water shallows out eventually. No more trout, any kind of rough fish, rather. And then you start seeing the tributaries coming. You'll hear a noise up in the distance, up ahead of you. And these things, there's always more. Their bark is worse than their bite. It sounds like it's a veritable Niagara ahead of you. And it always turns out to be just, laughably small, affluent, a tributary coming in. And so it is like with Beaver Lake, which we just talked about. Beaver Lake is just a little tributary coming in up. There's not really much going on with it. And Of course, it's not pitch black. Initially it is, but as you go mile after mile through these systems, there are like huge windows of light coming in that where it's what we call skylights. And you can exit the tunnel at that point if there's a ladder, happens to be like a steel ladder on the wall. You can exit at that point if you're just thoroughly done with it, or if there's a storm coming, something like that.
Okay, so it sounds like you have spent an extensive amount of time inside those tunnels. You said in your book that some of their areas there's cracks and the mud and silt and stuff gets in and causes these things like the petrified sandbar. I'd never heard that term before. What is that?
Oh, yes. The whalebacks and the. So initially when they build these tunnels, when George Wilson built them in the 1890s, this great proud achievement of his life, they're perfectly clean and as they would expect. But over time, if you don't get the gradient just perfectly right, they will begin the sand and other sediments, the sand, silt, and clay will begin depositing almost inevitably in the lower reaches of the tunnel that will settle out and periodically need to be shoveled out, even today. And so what happens is that if they sit in the water long enough, all the water that comes into this tunnel is flowed over concrete. It is flowed over concrete parking lots and through concrete pipes and so on. So there's a lot of calcium minerals in it. So it hits the sandbars and courses through the sandbars. And then if the water level drops a little bit, it dries and hardens and forms this durable, almost like a lump, this really durable kind of sandbar that's like with concrete impregnation. And you got to chip that out. Whalebacks, on the other hand, those aren't deposits so much as what the tremendous, there's a tremendous pressure, some artesian groundwater pressure underneath the tunnel that wants to kind of come up into that space. And it'll push the heavy granite pavers that floor the tunnel, to make up the invert of the tunnel, push it upward, so the floor will start bulging upwards. And eventually the floor, it'll form what we call whaleback. So it'll form this big bulge, this big linear bulge. That's the whaleback. And eventually, if it goes on long enough, then the back will break along that axis, and all the goo underneath will come out. Will kind of leak out of the whaleback into the tunnel, and then that's a big sign for public works. They got to come down and fix it.
Okay, this has been just amazing. I think we have to start wrapping this up, but I want you to tell one last story about the Trout Brook Tunnel. And you know me, it's my favorite story in your book about something that happened in Lowertown, August of 1983, when a big storm came.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story. If you drive through Lowertown nowadays along East 4th Street, you'll see there are various unroofed segments of the Trout Brook Tunnel. And in latter years, very recently, they've put a lot of gratings and so on over. You can't. But in the old days, you could just park your car and walk into. That's what we did. Much what I described. You park your car right there.
I think the section you're talking about is now covered by CHS Field.
Some of it, yes, and others, it's But the immediate part I'm talking about is still open. But where the water goes underground is actually has a grating over it. So what happens is back in the day, it was this is so in 1983. I don't know this from personal experience. I read it it's in the newspaper clippings. Some fine fellow decided to park a T-Bird, Thunderbird, along East 4th Street. And it was, it looked like, there's this kind of stormy weather, which really didn't bother him because, you got a car. It seems like a heavy object. Rain, a little bit of rain isn't going to move. You'd be surprised, though, however, when rain in sheets begins to build. All it takes is a stream several inches deep flowing at its maximum velocity. It can move very large objects. And so he parks his car and goes away someplace. And when he came back after the rain, his car T-Bird was gone. And he naturally thought it was stolen and probably just called the police and left. But as it turns out, at some point it was reported that the car is still there. It's still there, yes, just that it had been swept into the Trout Brook Tunnel and then spat out into the Mississippi River. And he probably absolutely did not suspect this had happened when he came back and found it missing. And there it was. So you could apparently go to the banks of the river for several days after the storm and look down and see the car resting ignominiously, in the shallows of the Mississippi River. And, the old song, that, the daddy took the T-Bird away. It's like a father of waters took your T-Bird away in this instance. And so they put signage there along East 4th Street. It says now, you see me today, it says, this street floods during rain.
Yes.
And it's like,
I remember when that happened, that storm, because the news actually had video of sewer covers in Lower Town exploding into the air as geysers came up. So it's real easy to see how the T-Bird got taken away. So I don't know. I just want to know how that guy explained it to his insurance guy. Yeah, the culvert took my T-Bird away. Oh, Greg, this has been great. And as usual, the time goes by too fast. I think if it's okay with you, I love that we mentioned the Kitsendale Tunnel and other things. And I know that has these amazing sewers. So if a sewer can be amazing. So maybe next time we can talk more about Kitsendale and just sewers, the unique sewers in general that you have explored over time.
Oh, you'll love that, but I advise you we can't do this near lunchtime.
Oh.
You're gonna...
You have been warned. We will see you next time. Thank you. Next time for Under the Brick.
Well, thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Under the Brick, featuring the subterranean adventures of local geologist and explorer Greg Brick. Your host has been tour operator Cynthia Schreiner Smith. Tune in again next time